Hello and welcome to the fourth in our series of 8 webinar sessions on trauma-informed financial education for every classroom, presented by the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership. Again, I want to say hello and welcome to those of you who are joining us for your first session, and welcome back to those of you. I see many familiar names, and I really appreciate you coming in and continuing to learn with us over these last 4 weeks. It's been a month together, and we've covered so much ground, and I'm so excited to see what we continue to talk about and discuss as we move through the rest of this series. Some brief housekeeping items. Please sign in one more time with your name and school or district in the chat. That is our first step in making sure you get these clock hours that you so richly deserve for being here on your own Monday in the summer. These slides and resources will be made available to you after the presentation, and Linda is going to tell you a little bit about that, as well as how you will receive your clock hours. Miss Linda.
Thank you. So there will be 1.5 clock hours for this session, or for any of the sessions in this webinar will be 1.5 clock hours. And so if you are just coming in, if you could put your name and district or organization into the chat, that would be great. We're going to use that as a sign-in sheet. And then for everybody that has registered through Alchemer, previously Survey Gizmo, I have moved those people into PD Enroller automatically, so you should have received an email about that. And as soon as I take attendance tomorrow, probably tomorrow morning, you will get an email about filling out the evaluation, or you can go in beforehand and do that. And then your clock hours will show up in the transcripts. So, and as Amy mentioned, we'll be uploading the slide deck for this session into the attendee page of PD Enroller. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me directly.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you very much to everybody who has, again, been coming and continuing to fill out those feedback surveys for us. They have been very valuable as we continue to develop these seminars throughout these 8 weeks. Please feel free to participate in the chat and drop questions using the Q&A feature during this presentation. We want this to be a chance for you to raise your confidence about talking about taxes. And so if you have the question, there is no bad questions here. Please feel free to drop it in so we can make sure to get that answered for you. As always, we would like to start with an acknowledgement that our homes are on Native land. I will be sharing a land acknowledgement from the Spokane City Council, which is the area that I am joining you from today. As always, I do love to see where everyone is joining us, the lands that you are joining us from across Washington, which you can see with this amazing map from native-land.ca. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands of the Spokane people, and that these lands were once the major trading center for the Spokanes as they shared this place and welcomed other area tribes through their relations, history, trade, and ceremony. We also want to acknowledge that the land holds that spirit of the place through its knowledge, culture, and all the original peoples since time immemorial. And during my introduction, I want to take a brief moment to tell you a little bit about the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership. We are unique to Washington State, established in 2004 by the state legislature, with the overarching goal of increasing access to high-quality, diverse K-12 financial education in our public schools. Our responsibilities include reviewing financial education instructional materials, and on our website, FEPPP.com, you will find what I love to call a robust clearinghouse of these resources organized by grade band, and including resources for our special population students, Spanish-speaking communities, and others. So please feel free to check that out. And in addition, we will be continuing to include resources within these presentations as well. We also provide professional development and training opportunities at no cost. And we have an exciting grant opportunity available to all school districts in Washington State. We will not be talking about that during this webinar series, but if you're interested, I highly recommend that you check out our website to learn more about this. And as for me, my name is Amy Klewer. I will be hosting this webinar for us today. I serve as the elementary program supervisor for FEPPP. I'm coming to you, as I mentioned, from Spokane, Washington, and you can see some of my qualifications on the screen there. I like to refer to myself as a financial wellness work in progress and say that I'm not here as a person with all of the answers, but as an educator who really could have used this kind of professional development when I was in the classroom. So to share a little bit about me related to jobs, our topic for today. My first job was at a restaurant in Hayden Lake. I don't know if anyone's ever had a chance to visit Hayden, which is very close to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I served hostess and served and bartended at a restaurant there during the summer for years. But technically, my first job would have been at the comic book shop in Spokane, Washington. I have actually collected comics since I was 14 years old. I'm an X-Men, I'm a Marvel girly. And the original title of this webinar was Who is FICA and why are they taking all of my money? Because that's a story my mom loves to tell. I came home with my first paycheck and I was just livid. Who is this person? And why do they think they are entitled to some of my money? And that shows you I did not have that background or understanding of how taxation worked in our state to be able to anticipate that unpleasant reality. Just another interesting fact about me, I have always filed my own taxes. I've never had another professional do it. For some reason, I enjoy that part of it. So I don't know if you have anything in common with my little my job knowledge there, but and then today we are joined by two very special guest speakers. Thank you so much for being here. We're joined by two educators who also have been involved with FEPPP and our Fellows program. So Bobby Grouchy, I don't know if you'd like to unmute and say hi.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bobby Grouchy. I'm a middle school teacher at Hutloff Middle School in Lakewood, Washington, Clover Park School District. Really excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah. And I have to ask, Bobby, can you give me one good reason for talking about taxes with kids?
Absolutely. For me, so I'm a CTE teacher and I teach about careers, planning, financial literacy, etc. Kids need to know what those tax dollars are used for as well. I think the background of having that civics lesson is something that we integrate into our instruction, whether you're an FCS teacher, whether you're teaching middle school STEM tech. Kids need to know that those taxes are used in certain ways. They have a better understanding as they become an adult. And when they do go out and vote, as they will, they can make smart decisions regarding that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And also we're joined by Jamie Zeller. Jamie, if you'd like to say hi.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. And Jamie, what's one good reason that you believe you should bring taxes into the classroom?
Well, I'm coming from a math teacher perspective when I first began teaching. And when I brought in the financial literacy, it was basically to understand it myself. And once I realized the errors I had, it was nice to be able to share with the kids, this is where we mess up, this is where we don't understand, and what these taxes are. And like you said, who's this FICA person?
Right. Anytime we can bring math into that concrete space is so impactful, right? And this is another great example. I'm so glad you mentioned that. All right, so let's jump right in. And I apologize, I do not have an agenda slide today, but Bobby is going to be sharing with us a presentation on Washington's taxation system. And Jamie is going to be sharing with us a specific lesson that she uses within the classroom to bring both tax information and the math to her students. So that's what we have to look forward to today. We are going to start with just a little bit of information about the state standards. And I have to tell you, taxes is one of those financial education topics that seems very meme worthy. As in, when you're talking about why didn't I learn this, you know, the Pythagorean theorem may not have been as useful as I had hoped, but why didn't we learn how to read our paycheck or pay the correct amount of taxes with the minimum amount of stress and uncertainty? So when we say teaching about taxes, what do we mean in Washington state? For our financial education competencies, if this is your first time joining us, we cluster financial education into 6 core competencies, which I like to refer to as the Jeopardy board of what you wish you had learned in high school. For our tax information, we're going to find that in the employment and income competency. Again, really relating it to knowing how these paycheck deductions directly affect me and the income that I bring home, affect me with the state, with the federal government, but also not only just in the immediate with this paycheck, but in April when taxes are due. So a lot of connections to that employment piece. This is where you're going to find it, although spending and saving is mentioned briefly. So with foundational knowledge, and again, I'm going to label this as foundational knowledge, although you would find this within the elementary state standards. I think that it is great to reframe that and just consider it foundational. If we are in middle school or teaching middle school, but our students need this background information, then this is where we're going to start. And it doesn't really do anybody any good to just say, well, let's go back to elementary school. So we'll just call it foundational. We'll build up to intermediate. So for foundational knowledge, we would really love our younger students, or that baseline of knowledge, to be understanding sales tax. And you'll see it's calculating, but not just that math side of calculating that sales tax for a given purchase. The background knowledge here is, what is a sales tax? Who collects sales tax? And what is your local sales tax rate? Personally, I liked to use the example of the Arizona iced tea cans. They were 99 cents. They used to be forever. They're probably more now and smaller as things have become. But, the students could understand that they weren't paying 99 cents at the register for that 99-cent Arizona iced tea. We would also love for them to be able to give examples of how governments use this tax revenue, because of course the answer to who collects sales tax is the government, either federal, state, or state or local government for sales tax. So federal government, if we look at the numbers and the data, our tax revenue, the top 3 categories go to health and healthcare, national defense, and social security. On a state level, again, health and healthcare, public schools, government buildings, maintaining both the buildings and the staff that work within them, and transportation as well. I'm curious, this is my first time I'm going to pose a question to our audience of 44 strong here. What do local governments use tax revenue for? Do we have that? What do we think? Do you guys know what our local government uses tax revenues when we're asking our students this question as well? Because I've got to be honest with you, this was not a question that I 100% could have answered when I was in the classroom. Sports stadiums, yes, absolutely. Education, we got a guess on education as well. Love it. Parks, services. I see parks again, fire, EMS, police, roads, emergency services. You guys are really good. Oh, sorry about that. So local governments use taxes to provide services such as police and fire protection. Yes. Roads and bridge construction and maintenance. Yes. And then social programs for the poor and elderly. And yes, local taxes are also the primary source of funds for public schools. So we are, as educators, invested in the tax system, whether we want to be or not. You guys were way ahead of me. Nice job, As far as intermediate knowledge, once our students are older and have more experience, we're ready to increase that depth of knowledge, and also they have more experience with money at this level. Maybe they've earned income at this point. So for these intermediate level, now we're looking at the idea of taxes on your paycheck, that the amount we earn per paycheck is not going to be the amount that we take home. We're going to list and compare those common payroll deductions. And I really want to advocate for keeping those domain-specific words, even though they can seem intimidating and larger than necessary, especially for maybe our younger learners. It's so important to have that exposure. We're not expecting them to retain it or memorize it, but just give them that real domain-specific language that they can hopefully connect to later on. So we're going to talk about required deductions and pre-tax deductions. That will be part of Jamie's presentation. And then the math is mathing, calculating how payroll deductions will affect that take-home pay. So once again, this idea of gross versus net, which is so foundational to understanding, a lot of employment and income content knowledge. And then how to read the paycheck. And from this point of view, it's not just a task. This is an empowerment strategy. How to read your paycheck to make sure you are getting what is owed to you. Because not only could your hours be wrong and you could be shorted, but the government makes mistakes once in a while, and you can advocate for getting that money back if there's been an error. So trying to maybe flip that reframe that idea of taxes away from being scary or a pain, and more of an empowerment strategy to make sure they're getting every cent that they have worked for. As we move into the mastery content and we're working with kids that are old enough to earn income, and it's becoming more normal, there's definitely a shift between, or at least a split between, the knowledge and skills here that I identified within the standards. There's some background information they really think within the standards it's important for them to know, such as the difference between a progressive and a recessive tax, identifying again that gross, net, and taxable income, hitting that repeatedly to make sure students understand that overarching concept. Being able to recognize an income tax withholding allowance, that standardized deduction that we are owed. And then this is so great, and I love this inclusion. Examining the benefits of participating in employer-sponsored retirement savings plans and those healthcare savings plans, that if I could go back and talk to my younger self who was just starting out in her professional career, I would have encouraged her to do so much. Not only are they saving you on the taxes you pay now, but they're setting you up to connect with your future goals, which can be, as we know, so powerful. So there's the knowledge we're hoping that we could send them out into the world with. And as far as practical skills, I think it's pretty simple. We would love that by the time our students go out into becoming, productive members of our state's economy, that they have practiced doing a W-4 and that's not unfamiliar to them at their first job. Also, that they've practiced doing that IRS form, I think it's called a 1040, but it is the simple return. You'll notice I've crossed out 1040 EZ. That form was discontinued in 2018. However, it's still within the standards if you did look at it. And as always, I want to mention the social and emotional side of personal finance and financial education. Taxes is one area, as Bobby kind of mentioned, that civics opportunity lesson. With our SEL standards, we have our self standards and our social standards. And when I was in the classroom, I found it much more challenging to address the social standards in a concrete way. Whereas this content with taxes is a really great way to look at and start those conversations. As an aside, the social studies standards related to these conversations in civics, for time, I could not include them in this presentation, but they will be included in the PDF, the PD Enroller slideshow that you'll have access to afterwards. So for social awareness, when we're taking perspective and empathizing with others from diverse backgrounds and cultures, just recognizing our locus of control when it comes to spending money. What do we have agency over? We have agency over our own independent decisions. Obviously, we don't have agency over how others spend money. But if we want control or agency or input in how our government spends money, that is something we can engage in through this content area. Social management is interacting with people from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds and being able to hold space for different experiences other than your own. And then also for that social engagement, again, connecting it to that sense of civic responsibility that can be hard to take from abstract to concrete, and consider the greater good or the bigger picture. It's interesting. When I was in college, I did my master's or my thesis on the individualistic versus collectivistic cultures, whether we center the individual or the group. And in Western cultures, traditionally, we are individualistic. We center ourselves. This is an opportunity to see the point of view where we center the good of the community, the state, and the country within the tax, which although fully recognizing can always be improved upon. Also would mention that this is critical consciousness, which is the third component of a culturally relevant pedagogy. So that's when you're teaching students to identify, analyze, and solve real world problems, especially those that result in societal inequities against marginalized groups. So the person who first wrote about culturally responsive pedagogy called this the so what piece and would have considered it one of the more important pieces in that culturally responsive pedagogy. Where can the students take this from here depending on what their values connect to? And again, civics. So we talked about this definitely will hit your social studies standards, right? We have the C2 within the Washington Social Studies standards that's understanding the purpose, organization, and function of our governments, laws, political systems. So here's my next question for our lovely audience. I have results of a Pew Research Center poll here. What does it mean to be a good citizen in maybe concrete actions? And for this example, let's say a good American citizen. We'll go on the national level. So if they ask people, what is a concrete action we could say, this makes you a good citizen, or this demonstrates good citizenship traits? So I'd be interested to see. And you know, during the Olympics and everything, it's always good to tap into our patriotism during this time, consider what it means to be a good citizen. We've got voting from Susan. Thank you very much. Absolutely. And from Sue, we got Susan J and Susan H all saying voting, following the laws, staying informed and engaged, educated to create the overall good of people by helping those, being tax abiding, voting. I love it. Thank you so much, everybody, for your engagement. Let's look at what the results are. So yes, absolutely. 74% of people surveyed thought it was very important to vote in elections in order to be a good citizen. And just under that, paying all the taxes you owe. 71% of people say that is what makes you a good citizen. But again, considering how we frame taxes in this country, there's sort of a disconnect there. It's the right thing to do, but it's never portrayed in a way that is not often portrayed in a way that can be this positive. So again, just encouraging you to frame it in that civic responsibility context. Because as we shift into talking a little about trauma-informed financial education and how that can relate to this content area, when taxes go bad, they can go very, very badly, right? And within the way we have our tax system set up in this country, it is at sometimes a bit of a game, right? You know, it's up to you or any person that you employ to figure out what you owe. But if the number is wrong, the consequences are very high. And so we want to make sure that we're considering that and how, in some ways, triggering taxes and the subject of taxes can be. And this is really going to apply to the educators, the administrators, the people in the building who have more experience paying taxes. Although, of course, students who have experienced this in the home might have this reaction as well. As a refresher, remembering that trauma in any form can be epigenetic, inherited, ongoing, or a single incident experience. Again, that example of perhaps being audited could be an example of that financial trauma. So, and like I mentioned, when taxes go bad, they go very badly. There are legal ramifications. And this is, I think, hammered into us, as I've mentioned, from an early age. We've got the cartoons, the jokes. Taxes are scary. Taxes are bad. Taxes are a pain. They will land you in jail. And so I can totally understand that if an educator or had issues with this, reliving that stressful experience would be particularly difficult, and avoiding it would certainly be easier. So we want to recognize the power again in sharing these experiences with our students and creating environments where we can be open and allow others to hopefully learn and create learning opportunities out of past experiences that have been painful. Also, as you can see on the screen, here are some examples of financial trauma that can appear in folks' lives. And remembering that some of these effects that we will see will be internal. Difficulty planning for the future, which is something we're really going to talk about next week when it comes to investing as well. I'm very excited about that conversation. Feeling unsafe or uncomfortable talking about money or reaching out for help about money, for example, reaching out to like a tax professional. And one we haven't talked about too much yet, but that is very relevant to this, is mistrust, or inherited mistrust of financial institutions and or the government. And that can be from anybody, whether you're a newcomer to this country or born here, depending on your life experience, that could be something that's really kind of baked into your beliefs and attitudes towards taxes. So at this point, I would love to introduce you to another member of our FEPPP staff, Milady Garcia, who is our Special Populations Program Supervisor. And she's going to tell you a little bit about what she does and why we believe teaching about taxes encourages equity for all of our students.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you all again for being here and participating in this webinar today. As Amy mentioned, my name is Milady Garcia, and I am the Special Populations Program Supervisor for FEPPP. And basically, in my role with FEPPP, I support financial education for our most underserved, underprivileged students. These are all students who are facing barriers to access education and educational resources and opportunities that are easily accessed by all other students regularly. So the vast majority of our special population students are facing extreme economic hardship, dealing with extreme economic hardship, and the vast majority of them are students of color. Many of them are working at earlier ages, are highly mobile, have higher absenteeism rates because of their high mobility, are facing housing insecurities, are in the involved in the justice system, are in the child welfare system. Many of them are in foster care. Recently arrived students who are English learners and may not understand our free market economy or how to participate in it, and are differently able students. And basically, I think making sure that our special population students understand taxes and what the purpose they serve is a powerful tool for making them feel included, because once they start paying taxes, and again, many of them are already doing it because they're employed at earlier ages, they feel like they're contributing. They feel like they're a part of this economy. They feel like they're a part of the decision making and contributing to that road being built and that hospital and the services that they're receiving in their own community. And they feel that ownership is really important for students, especially those who have been traditionally kept out of the conversation due to systematic inequities in the education system sometimes, but also in communities. So those are some of the reasons why it's pivotal and so important for all students, especially those in special populations, to learn about taxes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as you see, Milady's contact information is on there. I don't know that there's anybody else in the country that focuses on special populations receiving high quality, equitable financial education services in the entire country. So if that is a student population that you serve and you are looking for specific resources, Milady's the person. She's a great contact to have in that contact book. So please feel free to get in touch with her. Thank you so much, Milady. And I'm going to share one more tool here. I'm going to go ahead and copy a link into the chat. Maybe, I don't know if that's going to be the right link here. So this is going to be a link to a money script test. We did include one of these quizzes in the earlier webinar, and it was a quite popular feature. So wanted to make sure that we included this as well for folks. There's that link for you. So this is just one of many resources that are out there that can give you, that you can participate in, that your students can participate in, coworkers, your PLC. to kind of give you some perspective on what some of your money attitudes and beliefs are. For this particular survey, which is different than the first one shared, this is looking at money scripts, which they define as learned in childhood, often unconscious, usually passed down through generations, and a lot of the times just partial truths. If you click in, you'll notice they encourage you to really go with your first instinct and not worry so much about what people might think if they saw your answers to this. And you'll receive answers based on whether you are money avoidance, money focus, money status, and money vigilance are the 4 scripts that they address in this survey. And I have put my results up here for money avoidance, which I know that's a lot of text, but you can see I am medium on the money avoidance score. Financial avoidance and money avoidance is a trauma response behavior I've brought up before, where money is easier to just ignore it, push it to the side, and pretend it's not existing. Bills can go unpaid, overspending or not registering that there's a budget can happen. And this is one where obviously with the time regulations involved in taxes, where you can see some people really get themselves into some unfortunate situations. So again, another tool to see what are you bringing with you into the financial education conversation. We're all bringing something. There's no shame in that game at all. But sometimes it's sometimes it's useful for us to get that perspective on ourselves. And if you are, around my age, you love quizzes still. I don't know if that's anybody else, but just give me a quiz. I do enjoy it. So unfortunately, we cannot take time in the presentation to stop and allow everyone to do it. But I would encourage you to, on your own time or whenever you wish, take a look at it and see what you think. Again, just one resource of the many that's out there, but might be interesting. And to wrap up this section on trauma-informed approaches, I just want to share a few components of what we could consider a trauma-informed approach, and also give a friendly reminder that a lot of great teachers are already doing this, just like social emotional learning. If you're the kind of teacher that's here for 4 weeks in a row on a summer, I'm gonna guess that you're the kind of teacher who considers your students' social and emotional needs and probably builds a trauma-informed approach into your classroom. But in case you're looking for ways to really center this, we know good educators are going to prioritize safety. When we're talking about finances, we want to make sure we're including that emotional and mental safe spaces as well. Again, I'm always going to advocate for sharing our own mistakes as learning experiences and really allowing students to share anything negative, or even allowing our coworkers, our PLC members, to share those negative experiences without feeling judged, holding space for each other, and establishing connections by admitting when we don't know, and when we run up against the area of our expertise. Perhaps you only have one student in the foster system in your class, and perhaps you don't know what their rights are related to accessing their credit scores. But rather than, maybe pretending or shifting, we can just recognize we don't know the answer and put some effort into finding that solution for our student. Also, a big part is going to be self-awareness and that emotional teaching and supporting emotional regulation when we're having difficult conversations where emotions can run high or students can be, triggered by specific topics. And of course, this expands far beyond financial education. But if we can make a conscious efforts as the adults in the room to model responding and not reacting, right? To model when we need a moment to collect ourselves, when we are having a hard time with a conversation, or even when we're getting frustrated. I think that can go a long way towards creating these classroom learning environments where students feel their unique needs, their unique context of life is seen and valued. And again, one more time, I'm going to advocate for seeing opportunities to build trust in places where there's traditionally mistrust or misinformation. Consider reaching out to community partners and remembering that you don't have to know all of this or have all of this memorized to be able to bring it to your students, that just whatever you give them is in many cases more than what they're getting. And that being able to provide that touchstone of just being like the person, the resource that maybe they could go to with that question can serve dividends far beyond what we can see within even just the school year. And I shared this in our previous session. I wanted to share it again. This is a feelings chart shared with the permission of the creator, who is Arlene Naskahi from the Dene Nation. He is a tribal consultant and works with the Office of Native Education and Social Emotional Learning at OSPI. And just always encouraging when we're talking about finances to name our feelings, avoid I feel like, I feel like taxes are unfair. That's a statement, that's not a feeling. I feel so angry when I have to pay $300 at the end every April. That's a feeling, and that helps us identify with that self-awareness piece and modeling that positive emotional regulation and response. Also, this feels like a great time to give a friendly reminder that if you serve tribal nations, tribes as sovereign nations, have independent economies and completely different government regulations separate from the United States and Washington state. So if you do serve these communities, please let me know. I do have a link that I can share with you that is a Washington state Native education specifically for tribal communities. But just please, moving forward as we get into some of the content, know that some of this is not going to apply to tribal nations as sovereign nations. All right. And that's my part. So now we get to move forward with our guest presenters, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to prime Bobby here by asking you guys in our audience, how many states don't have a state income tax? We know that Washington is one of them, right? But do you know how many out there are like us by any chance? And this comes from, as you can see, NGPF, a fantastic resource. They have a whole unit on taxes. This is part of their question of the day series. Well, they'll give you 3 Google slides with the questions, answers, and food for thought. Easy to pop in and shuffle some financial education into a icebreaker or entry task. Ooh, we had some people get it. It is 9, right? I believe there are 9 states that do not have state income taxes. We got jokes in the chat. And so as we are one of them, and we have an incredibly unique Washington state taxation system, I'm going to turn it over to Bobby, who's going to share some of this information with you.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful Monday. This morning I was in Ridgefield, Washington. We're getting a new dog, and they have a different tax rate than we have here in my hometown of Stillicum, where I live, which is just south of Tacoma. It's wonderful to be with all of you guys today. Like I said, I've been a classroom teacher. We got to update our slides a little bit. I think I'm going on year 20. Once I hit the top of the salary schedule, I know I'm really old, Amy. Once I hit the top of that, my son's 21. The salary schedule, I stopped thinking about that. And I'm also entering into my 2nd year of my doctorate at Washington State University. So it's great to be with you guys. Go Cougs. All of that being said, here's some stuff that I use with my students. And yes, Washington State is different. Some of the things, I see those questions. I'll hold off on those and in a little bit, Amy will help us to answer those ones. But we're going to talk a little bit about if we don't have an income tax, then how the heck do we pay for everything? And you guys already know there's ways that we do that. There's this thing called the B&O tax. We have sales taxes. What about marijuana? What about liquor taxes? And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other taxes. Some we know well about. And then how do we pay for things like parks and water districts and things like that? So Amy, go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, now, some of the things to know about here is, yes, as a classroom teacher, as a CTE teacher, my goal is to teach kids. I teach at a high poverty school. Our title population is, I believe, close to 80%. So part of my job is teaching kids about what their responsibilities are, what their opportunities are, but really to take advantage of all of the resources that are available to my students. And I am a proud teacher of Washington State. I moved here when I was 6 years old for the Philippines. I was born there. And I want my students to know what their opportunities are that are out there. Here's an example of a snapshot of data about our population. This is from this data is from Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I think we got this from infographics. They put a whole bunch of different data together, but it shows you some really good things. And again, remember the perspective that I'm coming from, and I know not everybody here today is from Washington State, is how do I prime that pump for my students so that they're ready to move forward and they want to be engaged. I want to keep them highly engaged. I want them to know opportunities there. Being an adult's hard, right? And we're doing those baby steps. So I teach students everywhere from 6th grade to 8th grade. Visual capitalists. There you go, Amy. All right, you can go on to that next slide. Now, I'll say this in advance. My apologies to Amy. This has been a very busy summer, so we are going to update this one with our next group of folks that we do. We've been doing this presentation for a little bit. We're actually getting ready for a large presentation. If any of you guys are going to be at our Federal Reserve Bank Keys to Financial Success training on Wednesday. Wednesday. I will see you guys there. So yeah, Washington is one of the states without a personal or corporate income tax. And that might seem kind of strange. Why does Washington make this decision? In some ways, when we get into a little bit more about why we don't have an income tax, that can start to feel philosophical. And I'm not going to go into, you guys can go ahead and look up about Washington sales tax rates. People will have different views about it politically. There's a lot of different information about it. I'm going to be a little bit more, I'm just kind of give you the details behind it. And remember that this is as a classroom teacher, this is kind of the paradigm that we're under. And I don't know, it gives you a different view, especially when you start to dive into data. So we also have a general gross receipts tax and a B&O tax, which we're going to talk about a little bit more as well. What you're going to see here, let me go on to the right slide, is where does the money come from? So there's a lot of different ways that are here. One of the big things that we have here and how we pay for things too is we're going to be talking about property taxes, but sales taxes obviously are huge. Like I said, we're going to go into that a little bit. Let's take a look at the revenue breakdown. Go ahead and the next slide, Amy. So tax revenue collected and what does it provide? So what is the kind of stuff that it goes to? It goes to things like education. If you're a Washingtonian, you know the primary duty is public education. That's our biggest expenditure. That's what we spend our money on. Human services, healthcare, public safety, and natural resources in defense of those natural resources. This is our fiscal year 2021 numbers. And it shows you here again, the majority of the funding comes in from retail sales tax. Now, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but a little bit to know about is that we have a state sales tax rate. Anybody in the audience know what that is off the top of your head? Amy, of course you know. And I already owe you a Starbucks card for another training that we did, but what is it, Ms. Cleaver? Do you get an answer? I can answer. It's 6.5%. So our state sales tax rate is 6.5%. And then your local, there you go. Thank you, Philip. And then your local taxing agency, which can vary, will also have a tax rate for you as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but you can already start to think in your head, where do you think, and don't answer in the chat yet, okay? I want to give you a little time to think. Where do you think we have the highest local sales tax? And where do we have some of the lowest sales tax rates in the state? And those can make differences. Once we get into that, we'll talk a little bit more about how that can make a difference in the decisions that you make when you're buying a car, when you're doing a whole bunch of other little things here in the state. So let's go ahead and move on to that next slide. So B&O tax. All right. So B&O tax is a big thing that really impacts our businesses. Let me pull up my notes here because boy, I tell you, before I prep this, if you want to know stuff that's really exciting for 7th graders, especially if I'm teaching this during 6th period, it is B&O tax. No, it's not really. This is the kind of stuff I do. I'm just being honest with you guys how I introduce this with my students. So on a day-to-day basis, I teach my kids about technology. We do soldering. We do a lot of mechanical stuff. I spend my Fridays usually on finance. We call them Financial Fridays. That's the day that we do these things. And I don't expect for my students to conceptually understand, like get all this stuff down. What I want them to know is that we have a taxation system. It works in these different ways, and it's all about building their capacity as they get older, knowing that businesses pay money for different things, and that's how we finance the state. That's how we provide services like public education, police officers, roads, or their local skate park. And a B&O tax, let's go back here over to my notes. So here's the thing, is there's not one particular B&O tax. It varies depending on the industry or the business. And you can understand that there's lobbying that goes on, gets involved in that. So if the state wants to encourage something, they might have a lower B&O tax rate. If they want to discourage something, they could have a higher B&O tax rate. And those are things that are happened legislatively. So those are decisions that can be made in that way. And again, it's calculated on the gross income from activity. So what is their gross income that they receive? Not necessarily on profit margin, it's based on that. There are, in these sorts of taxes, lots of little pieces. And I am a middle school teacher. Let me say that again. So I am not an expert here, okay? If you have questions about your B&O tax, you're a small business owner, I highly recommend you talk to your tax professional. I'm giving you an overview here for kids. I just want to make sure that you get that. So in no way do I consider myself an expert on these individual types of taxes, but it's important for those things to know. So can different businesses take advantage of certain situations? Absolutely. And that's something where, depending on the revenue in your business, that you would want to work with, your tax advisor or your accountant to think about those kind of things. All right, Amy, let's go to the next one. Retail sales tax. Here's where it's fun. Okay, so now, this one's easy. Okay, I'm sorry. Who thinks they know where the highest sales tax in Washington is? Does anybody know? This should be fast. Yay, Chris, you got it. Okay, so Seattle, it is not Bellevue, actually. Bellevue is a little bit lower. You're close, though. I'm going to drop something into the chat here. See, and Seattle is the highest at, I actually wanted to look at what Bellevue was. Okay, so Seattle's the highest at 10.35%. If you want to take a look at your tax rates, you can go ahead and click on that link right there and see what your local tax rate. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. So 10.35% in Seattle, okay? Holy moly indeed, Patrick. Where do you think the lowest tax rates in the state are? Does anybody have a guess? And there are 3 taxing institutions that have that. Where are the lowest? And you might be a little surprised. Okay, Eastern Washington, all right, Everett, Yakima County, good guesses, good guesses. Actually, Yakima is, let's see here, Yakima is at 8.3%. So their local tax rate is 1.8%, the lowest in the state. And also you're going to notice too, Amy mentioned if you come from, because obviously we work with our partners with our tribal compact schools, we include the sales tax on tribal lands as well in the sheet. But the lowest taxation in the state is in Klickitat County. Unincorporated Klickitat County. So right next to so the lowest is unincorporated Klickitat County, Goldendale, and then Bingen, which is a tiny town across from Hood River in Oregon, and right next to White Salmon, if you know where that is. If you know big old White Salmon, like, go ahead, Amy.
I was saying, when you say the rate, does that include, is that local plus state
Correct.
rate?
Yeah,
You're saying?
correct.
Okay, so
Yes.
you're saying their
Yeah.
total
Local
is,
plus
oh my
state, yes.
goodness.
So if you live in Seattle and
Wow.
you know this well, when you go to McDonald's and your hamburger is $1, okay, you're paying $1.11. So that does make a difference on what sales tax is. And those are used for a variety of things at the local level, paying for those budgets and other pieces. But retail sales is the majority of the income that the state collects. Okay, so that's what we pay things on. And I mentioned a little, and gosh, I keep on trying to stay away from this philosophical argument, but as we talk about this, I want to say, do you know of any countries that don't have an income tax, that completely use that off of use tax? Any idea on that? There are entire countries, there are many of them. One of the big ones you might think of are places that are tax havens. So for example, the Bahamas, Kitts and Nevis, Turks and Caicos, also countries that have very high, that are petro economies, so that have net receipts where they support their citizens. The UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Monaco doesn't have a sales tax rate. So they're very specialized places, and those nations support themselves off of use taxes and consumption taxes as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those consumption taxes. I'm just looking at my time and making sure that we are good. Okay, so that's a little bit about retail sales tax, and we're going back to marijuana. And we're going to talk about a little bit, not just marijuana. I want to talk about when we talk about these are what some people might define as our sin taxes. Okay. And what a thing to imagine, you know, I graduated high school in 1996, and I couldn't imagine for a second that I would be presenting on marijuana sales tax, you know, at the age of 46. But this is an important part of the revenue to our state. So in 2023, so this shows you the numbers up to 2021, $560 million. And I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not going to tell you that, but our actual marijuana revenue declined last year, if you can imagine that. And it was $465 million last year. So I'm not going to make any connections. You guys know what we lived through. We talk about it all the time between 2020, 2021. A lot of people were spending more time at home back then. I don't know. I'm sure there's a research study that can be done that can talk a little bit about that. But the actual income from marijuana sales declined last year. The other piece that you know well, and if you've lived in Washington for long enough, you probably remember that we used to have state liquor stores, and we don't anymore. You might remember voting on that, making those changes. So you're not, it's not shocking to you when you look at a bottle of liquor and the price the price is a lot more than what you expect. Just off the top, we have a spirits liter tax. So for every liter that you buy, it's $3.77 and $0.7708. That's for every liter. So that's just on top of it. So there, you are not going to buy a bottle of liquor unless it's free. That's going to be less than $3.77. The other thing that we have is we have a 20.5% sales tax on liquor as well. And if, like I said, if you go out and you buy that, you guys remember a lot of people call it, and I love Costco, but a lot of people know that that law that we passed was highly funded by Costco. That's where that money's going to as well. So we have those two sin taxes. We have the liquor tax, and we also have the marijuana tax. Excuse me. All right, we can now go on. All right, now use taxes. This is an interesting one. Okay. Use taxes are goods or certain services in Washington when sales tax has not been paid. Goods in the state are subject to either sales tax or use tax, but not both. Use tax is supposed to compensate the state when sales tax hasn't been paid. Here's an example. You buy something in another state, Oregon. They're purchased from someone who is not authorized to collect the sales tax. You can buy them from lots of different ways, but here's the big way that this usually hits, okay? High value collectibles or art is one of the things that the state goes after. So let's say you buy a piece of art in another state. You might be subject to local taxation there, but you also could be subject to local taxation here. In many times, it is the responsibility of the person that makes the purchase to pay this tax. Okay, so that tells you, and again, I'm a middle school CTE teacher from Steilacoom, Washington, but I want to remind you that this is one of those taxes where a lot of the receipts from this is based on people self-reporting on those items that they purchased. The state does have folks that work on that as well, but that's one of those things, you know, like if I go out and, oh, you guys can't see right now because I have to cover we're remodeling right now, so that's why I'm using that wonderful Wazoo background behind me. But if you buy a nice collectible, like I have a signed baseball from Ben Bernanke, if anybody knows who that is, good on you. But if I could self-report that, use tax, and then pay for it that way. However, that would be if I bought it in person. I actually bought it off of eBay and paid that sales tax. All right, now let's go.
I'm just going to jump in really quick on this one. Connect it back to last week when we're talking about buying a car. So making sure that our students know this. Some of our smarter kids might think, hey, I'm going to go buy my car in Oregon. Depending on how close they are, they don't have a sales tax. And not recognize that, you know, the state's going to get theirs. They're going to get it when you come back over and you register it. So just ways that these are all of these concepts are interconnecting. I wanted to jump in quick.
Amy knows this from living in the wonderful area of Spokane, and many of us know this as well. One of the largest car retailers in America is in Idaho, and people fly in from all over the country because they sell trucks and other vehicles at lower rates. One of their biggest things that they do is make sure that the local taxes are collected, because when people come in from out of state, if you go buy a car in Florida, if you go buy it from somewhere else, you're still going to be required to pay those taxes, and you're still absolutely going to pay those tabs for those tabs and the registration and everything else. So that's one thing just to be aware of. All right, property tax. Okay, so here's the fun. Well, I think all of this is fun. That's why I'm here today. So here's one that's a little bit of fun. we might think about what does property tax pay for? Pays for all sorts of stuff. Department of Revenue does not collect this tax, but they oversee the administration of it. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can get information online. And there's some special things as well. I'm going to put some links into the chat here where you can find out some different stuff. But you're not going to go to the state website to get information about your local property tax rate. And you're not going to be able to see this because I have my green screen stuff working. But I'm holding up, oh, you kind of see it. Does anybody know what that is? If you own a home, you know what that is. That is my tax assessment for this year, okay? And that has the assessed value. It tells you some different things. And there's a lot that's in there. It also shows you some of the steps that we take, like what is the philosophy behind property tax works? Because your local municipality can make some changes to how that works. So for example, if you're elderly, if you need a different assessment, you can make some changes to that, but it pays for all sorts of things. That's what pays for schools. That's what pays for your local park district. So me here in Pierce County, it helps what pays for, I'm part of the taxing district for Metro Parks of Tacoma, and it also can pay for your local water. I'm part of the West Pierce Fire District out here, so those are some of those things that'll pay for as well. Schools, park districts, etc. One of the important things to know about this is that we have one of the important things to know about here as well is that there is your local district that imposes a tax, right? There has to be a levy. So for example, I voted in 2022 on the Metro Parks levy rate. We pay 75 cents for every $1,000 valued of my house, okay? Metro Parks board can vote to increase that by 1% per year. Okay, so they can do an increase to your taxes at the local level without having to do another vote. And they can also bank that as well. There are some exceptions, like for all of these things, guys, there are lots of exceptions. And wait till you see this other tax list. There's all sorts of other little tax that are really industry specific as well. All right, go ahead, Amy. So what about other taxes? There's all sorts of other taxes. You know, if you go and so if you've ever stayed at Great Wolf Lodge, like I said, my son's 21 now, so he doesn't want to go. But when he was younger and I took him there, and apparently they've had a wonderful remodel as well, just so you know. So you want to check that out in Lewis County. But you pay this big old fee on top of it. Why do I pay this thing? You know, it's not those resort fees when you go to Vegas, but you could pay $35, $50, etc. on top of what you're already paying. So that could be that hospitality tax, but there's all sorts of other taxes that exist. You guys probably know well, not all of you, but if you live in the Puget Sound region, you very well know about that RTA tax that we pay, which I don't think that's too political. I'm okay to say this. I am a big fan of because gosh, we need it. And so seeing those light rail systems and the all that other fun stuff come in. But here's an example of all sorts of different pieces of specialized tax that we have here. And I'm going to learn a little bit more about the syrup tax. So if you attend this next year, or if you're at that training, I want to know what the heck exactly our syrup tax is and what that means. So there's some examples of some of the other taxes that we have as well. All right. Now, Amy, you actually found this slide. Do you want to talk about this? And I can talk a little bit more about the philosophy as well.
Yeah, it's just an interesting little story that when the day that they were voting for whether or not they were going to approve a new income tax in 1932, there were 9 justices and one of them had a heart issue. And so he couldn't vote. He abstained from voting. So it went 4-4 and split the vote. And so they ended up, the governor appointed a replacement to try to get the tax to go through, but in the time, and one of the people had switched their vote, and so it ended up failing. So had he not had a heart issue, he may have voted yes, and therefore we would have a state income tax at this point. We would have had one in 1932. But this strange little story is part of the reason why we don't.
And yes, indeed, we have, the Supreme Court has addressed this a couple of times. If you know about the capital gains tax, you might remember that went before the Supreme Court in 2022 because does that violate the Constitution of the state of Washington? The state of Washington has found very clearly that, and the case was in 1933, that and the rationale behind that was that it violated the uniformity requirement for property taxation. So currently, changing to an income tax would require the legislature to do so, and that is not that's not something that's probably going to come up anytime soon. I can just say that. Okay, so it's interesting in in very liberal Washington state that we have a system that does not have an income tax. So we have a usage tax there. Getting down to a little bit more, it comes down to kind of a philosophical thing. Like I said, there are places that believe
Yes.
fully in. Oh,
Okay, I'm
sorry,
gonna
it's
give just
okay.
a friendly reminder for everyone to mute themselves, please.
So part of this could be part of this is a philosophical piece as well as in what do you believe in? Do you believe in consumption so that we tax you based on what services or industries you're using, or do you believe that there should be a kind of flat income tax that taxes everybody the same? Last one that we have here, and Amy, gosh, we were worried that I wouldn't take up all my time. Hopefully, I'm doing okay. And if you want to go on to the last slide. So here's where it gets really fun. And this is a conversation. I keep on saying things are fun. This is a conversation that you can have with folks when they talk about Washington State and where we sit on that spectrum. Thank you, Amy. We actually have one of the lower tax rates comparatively to the rest of the country. Well, so now these numbers have changed. Okay, I will tell you that. And man, this one's from 2015. I didn't put it, but our numbers have. We are not in the top percentile of taxing entities in the country. So it's an interesting thing there, like I say, and that's why you're going to see different things. If you look up Washington's tax system fair, you're going to hear all sorts of different things. But it has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you guys. If I can ever give you anything else, hopefully I interact with you at different CTE conferences, and I'm happy to turn it over to my good friend Jamie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bobby. I just want to circle back really quick. William had a question. If we don't have an income tax, why are we seeing commercials for people to register with the state for refunds? Charnel brought up that you're probably seeing those commercials for that working family tax credit managed through that Department of Revenue. So thank you so much, Charnel, for bringing that up as well. And all right, like Bobby said, we're going to transition over to Jamie, but we have a little introductory activity before she jumps into her lesson, which is Uncle Sam Takes a Bite. I love this. I'm so glad Jamie included this in her slideshow because in this world, nothing is certain but death and taxes, right? So let me see if I can get this going quickly here for us. We're going to jump into a Kahoot that is a quick 7 questions, and we're going to say this is the introductory, kind of the appetizer for an exercise from Financial Fitness for Life, which is a one of the financial education curriculums that we have used within our trainings as well. So excuse me one moment while I get this going. All right. So, and then hopefully this will give us back. Thank you, Bobby, so much for all of that information. But we know sometimes talking about taxes can be kind of a lot. So let me make sure, and someone let me know if you can see my screen here with the Kahoot.
We can see it, Amy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so if you are willing to jump in, and I would really appreciate anybody who is willing to jump in and test their knowledge on 7 quick questions related to taxes. This is also a great way to win some FEPPP swag. We are going to be throwing a package in the mail with some FEPPP branded swag. We have a cord bags and a really cool little phone stand and things like that. So, oh my gosh, my player limit was reached because I don't have a pro account, and I apologize for that. So we're just going to go ahead and get started with the 10 of you that jumped in. Thank you so much. And we're looking at what are all of these deductions from my paycheck. Gross income is the total amount of money a worker earns before any deductions are made. And of course, with the Kahoot, I know many of you are probably familiar with this. It's a fantastic way to introduce information, get your kids kind of primed to discuss something, and just kind of get an idea of what they know or already know. And I apologize. Yes, Robin, it filled up because I did not have the pro account. It's been a while since I've done this in the classroom, so I apologize. So of course, gross deduction or gross income is the total amount Nice job, Stephanie. Let's keep it moving. Net income is often called take-home pay because it is the amount on an employee's paycheck. Net income. Let's see what we have here. Awesome. Very much. It is true. Again, so one great visualization I love is that we have the gross, and then what we can actually catch in that net is what we can take home. That was I remember being an image that actually stuck with me when I received financial education. Stephanie in the lead. Nice job. All right, we're looking at mandatory deductions. And in the chat, we will absolutely make sure you have this link so you can use it in the classroom. It is free, and it is also included in this PowerPoint presentation. And then, no, Shanti, if you want to participate, I don't see why we couldn't put some answers in the chat if we wouldn't want to. So which of these are mandatory? Federal and state, FICA, and local taxes. All of these are required. But of course, we as our local state taxes, yes, would have been an exception. Ooh, Ian jumping in. 4 more questions left. Ooh, okay. What does FICA stand for? If you could type this into the chat and be correct by the time that they answer this, I would be so impressed. And thank you, Jamie, who has put the link to this Kahoot in the chat there for you guys to click and bookmark now so you know you can find it later. What does FICA stand for? Of those options, it is the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. Very nice. Who's up there? Still with Ian. All right, so who pays for FICA, right? Who pays for, is it only the employee and employer, only the employer, or none of the above? Nice. This one was quick. You guys knew. So we have both employee and employer contributions. It's important for our kids to know that it's not just you. Your employee is contributing too. Ooh, Stacy jumping in. What benefit is defined as provides in the event that an employee is completely disabled? We call that life insurance, medical insurance, long-term disability insurance, and dental insurance. As adults, we were keying right in on those terms. We know our students might need to see some of that specific vocabulary. How we doing? Stacy's holding strong, Sierra in second, Ian in third. Last one, which is not an example of an itemized deduction. Interest on home mortgage, child care expenses, medical expenses, or birthday gift expenses. Very nice. Birthday gift expenses would not be considered an itemized deduction. So congratulations to Ian, and thank you for participating and jumping in. Thank you, Sierra. And thank you to our winner, Stacy. Congratulations. All right. Thank you for that little brain break. I'm going to reshare my screen here and turn it over to Jamie.
Well, Amy got to steal my thunder and have my fun guy that came in to begin with. But yes, that actually comes from the next gen personal finance curriculum that I use. Many of us use, actually. It's got some great benefits in there, but it's a good way to get things going as we start approaching the taxes. So I am a math teacher. I teach high school, and I have primarily seniors. And just wanted to say thank you to Amy and FEPPP for getting this organized for us. And then all of you teachers, yes, I know it's summer, so it's awesome that you guys are here, especially to talk about taxes. So with the math, I also teach CTE. I added that in the last couple of years so the school can get that enhanced funding. So it's kind of a transition going from math into more like a business perspective and looking at it from a different perspective. So one thing that we need to do as teachers, and we know this, is to not reinvent the wheel. And one of the things that FEPPP provides for us is a variety of curricula to take from. And one of them is the Econ Ed link, which we can all get online right now. So this actually comes from this lesson, and then I added my own little flavor to it, my own little personality, and we all do that as teachers. But why reinvent a wheel if it is already created for us? So to start off with, we have our what students will be able to learn. So you can have your targets up on your board and ready to go. And the time required there. Amy, go ahead and move on. And I like to start this out kind of easy, and it's gonna extend and go a little bit farther here sooner, but you can pick the type of student that you have, the level of student you have, and you can edit it to what we need. So starting with a paycheck stub, yay, you got your first job, you got hired, you're very excited about that. And then you start looking at that paycheck stub and something's not right. I didn't get as much as I think I should have gotten. And as Amy said, that FICA guy came in and took some money. Go ahead, Amy. And you can kind of click through the transitions here, Amy. But students don't take enough time to sit and look and understand what is on their paycheck stub. So you get your gross pay and your net pay with some of that vocabulary for this period. And so they can understand that we're looking at just the pay period from, in this example, it's June 2nd to June 16th. And then they also have the year to date. And that's where we can start looking at in the future standard deductions and seeing how much money we have made year to date. So I like to point that out to the students. And then moving on there, Amy. So we end up with what are those deductions and identifying the difference between gross and net. I also like to tell my students gross pay is the pay I wish I had, so it's gross, and net pay is what I get to put in my net and take home. So that's one of the ways that I kind of will jump in between what those are, but the difference are those deductions. And then next, this is weird not having control of my own PowerPoint. Okay, so we've got deductions that are coming out. There's the required deductions that, again, going back to this FICA, what is happening here? You've got the required, and then you've got voluntary deductions that come out, and they, again, come out per pay period as well as year to date. So I like to point that out for the students. Go ahead. And then what I like to do, this first lesson, again, this is coming from some of the material online. What are all of these deductions? This starts out pretty basic. What is my gross income? And it's got some simple examples in there. What is my net income? What is required? Next slide, Amy. And what are some other possible deductions that come out, the voluntary ones, depending on what we do. Depending on the level of your student, you can just give them this when you don't really know what you're doing. This is a pretty good guide. It's that well written. But if your kids are a little bit of a higher level and you don't need to go as simple, then you can just pick these things out and you will have just kind of as a reminder, hey, this is what I need to talk about, because we can go on so many other different tangents with this. But I like how it has the deduction, who pays for it, and why are we paying that deduction? That, going back to what Bobby said earlier, understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it. It sucks. We have to pay our deductions. So what is it actually doing? What's it benefiting for us? So that's the first little lesson. And then I like to add in real stuff. I would always get frustrated with examples from books telling me that I was going to make 10% interest on my savings account with a bank or a credit union, which we know is not realistic. So what I've done here is this is actually a paycheck stub example that our union provided for us teachers to go through and say, okay, how do you actually read your paycheck? And explaining, because as simple as the one we just looked at, we know that paycheck stubs get more complicated. So in this particular one, I know it's fuzzy, but you've got the money that's coming in the top left. And then the bottom left, those are all of the employee deductions that comes out. And when you go through each of those, it is crazy when you see all of the money coming out and the kids start getting like really depressed with it. And if you want to tie in benefits, over on the right side, we've got benefits that are coming to us as well that we still pay for with those benefits. But it's a lot, like for medical insurance, it's a lot less cheaper paying what we have to pay, and then the district paying a higher percentage of that. So I like to give them a real paycheck stub to look at.
Can I ask Jamie really quick? So how do the kids react when they see that you're sharing this, what your actual paycheck looks like? Do you get a reaction from that?
I get more of a reaction when I log into my own system and I open up my last paycheck stub. I have to be careful with that because I'm, giving private information. And I've had some situations where teachers don't make a lot of money, and then they would see my paycheck stub and I'd have to remind them, I'm not just coming into the industry. I've been teaching for over 20 years. So I've had a ladder that I've walked up on the scale, and Washington State, we're pretty lucky up here as well. But they respond more positively because they're seeing something that is real. I'm authentic. I'm not afraid to show something that they can relate to. And I'll let them pull up their paycheck stubs on their phone, and so they can go through and look at it and compare. And then they can also see how going from entry level, first time out of school jobs to as you move up in the career and the benefits that you can get, but also the deductions that come out.
That's amazing. I just have to give you a lot of credit for being willing to share that with your students, because I know that can be a very vulnerable thing, but again, it's so powerful. So thank you for modeling that.
Yeah, so this is just an example from our union. They actually went through and did that. I'll open up my own personal stuff too. Okay, so then we get into some of the vocabulary, the standard deductions and the filing statuses. You're single, you're married, filing jointly, head of household, qualified widower. And then I like to show them that there's a difference between each year. The standard deduction changes. And we can say standard deduction, but they don't always get what that is. They don't get that you don't have to pay taxes on this first part. And as things are costing more money, inflation and all of that, how the government does change. I think next year it's 14,650, something like that, 14,000 something. So we'll start talking about like the standard deduction, and then that moves into, let's put it into play. So go ahead to the next one, Amy. We talk about the different types of taxes. We've got the regressive taxes. Everybody pays the same thing. I like to use the example of going to Target. Whether you're Bill Gates or Jamie Zeller and you go to Target, we're going to pay the same tax rate there at Target. They don't look at his income and then base how much he pays off of that. Progressive is, I use a thumb game with my students a lot, but as you make more money, you're going to pay more. As your income goes up, the more that you'll pay, the more in taxes as well. And then proportional is where you pay just a flat tax rate. So that would be an example with property taxes. So with our government, we actually use the progressive system. So the more money you make, the more you pay in taxes. And then next, this video, we won't have time to show. So if you want to pause that, Amy, you can. But it's great because if most of our kids are visual. As a math teacher, when I come in and I'm talking about inequalities, I have to approach it differently in my classes because they hate math. So when I would get to taxes, I would say, like, do you guys remember those alligators that, the alligator ate the big number? And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, when are we ever going to use that? And then I would be able to tie in this taxes. Okay, here's where we get to use those alligators, those inequalities. This video is a great representation of the different pockets and how we're taxed at different rates. So even though you may be in the 24% tax bracket, you don't pay 24% on your taxes. You know, you've got the first part where you don't pay taxes, which is the standard deduction. And then there's a portion at 10%, 12%, and so forth, depending on what year we're in. One thing I tried this year that was kind of fun is I took some red Solo cups and I put the inequalities on each of the cups, what amount of money that they held. And then I took water and I would pour it in the cup until it filled up and it overflowed all over the place. And then I go, oh, that pocket's full. We need to go to the next pocket. So that first one, the standard deduction, you didn't have to pay any taxes on that. That's tax-free. And then once you get past the standard deduction, that cup, when it's filled up, you pay 10% on that. And I would just keep filling up the cups until I got through all of my income. So then they had another visual with water all over the floor as well, showing them how we go to the next cup, and how they're taxed at those different rates, but we don't tax the part that's already been taxed. And that's a big misconception. So highly recommend this video. The next lesson is where we get a little bit mathier. And as a math teacher, I feel like I have to start at the beginning and teach everything. And I'm trying to embrace, some of you might have heard of a thinking classroom. I'm trying to embrace more of that. And I finally just gave this to them to see what they would come up with before I jumped in and told them exactly what to do. So instead of teaching them, I'm like, let's see what you guys come up with. And I had them on the boards around my classroom working in small groups. But here's an example where, okay, that first, you've got the standard deduction. I know you probably can't read it, but it gives you a standard deduction for a married family or a married couple. And then from the standard deduction to the next amount, it breaks it down so you can see how much money is in each of those pockets or in each of those cups, and how you paid 10% on just that first cup. Once it fills up to the $8,000 for this example, you're done. You've already paid taxes on that. You don't have to pay taxes on that money again. So inequalities again, math, everything between $8,000 and $32,000 after the standard deduction comes out, now you pay 15% on that amount of money that's in there. So students will make the mistake of going, oh, I pay 15% on $32,000. Well, no, you don't, because you've already paid 10% on that $8,000. So you have to subtract that off. I know this is starting to get a little bit more confusing now. The great thing about the material that you can get online for free is that they give you an answer key, and it literally walks you through as a teacher. Say this, then do this. Here's the answers. So as intimidating as this is to jump into, everything is provided for you so you can make sure you know what the heck you're talking about when you go into it. So this lesson kind of takes those pockets that we saw. Okay, the next one. Again, I like to give them something real. That example is not what we currently use. To use this, I would update this for the 2024 tax brackets, but they can see what the tax rates are after the standard deduction is taken out for all of the different filing statuses. The next one. And this is not from the lesson that I brought it from the Council of Economic Education. This comes from my financial algebra book. When I first started teaching this, I was very, very, very mathy. And I've had to change the way I teach it because math is scary. For those of you who are math teachers, or you remember some of the math classes you you took, you'll see that you've got the different notations. So we can really tie this into a traditional math class as well and show them where we use these inequalities. But we've got the notation, we've got the interval notation that's got the alligators, and then we have the compound inequalities. And so we can take some of the vocabulary that we use in a traditional math class and tie it into where the heck we actually use this. And going on to the next slide, you can make it even mathier. I've gone through and taken the whatever the tax bracket is, and I've had the students go through and they have to make the equation. And you can see down there in the bottom that there's a piecewise define equation, and it really ties the math into what they are doing. I highly recommend the perspective you're coming from here. If you're coming from a math teacher perspective, you can definitely go this. This is like Algebra 2 level. If you are coming from like a business teacher level, I shouldn't say level, but as a business teacher, CTE, where it's not a math credit, you don't have to go into this. But for those kids that want that more advanced and kind of geek out on the mathy stuff, this is available as well. And Amy, on the next slide, embracing my continued mathiness, you've got the point slope formula and you've got the slope intercept formula. And again, those are based off of the tax table. So I'd actually have my kids graph these, and they had to graph the piecewise defined function. I haven't done that mathy in a while, but that is an option as well. And then I get my math nerdiness out in there. So the next one, here's where I would be like, okay, here's an example for you guys. I'd like you to create those equations using the 2023 standard deduction. For this next year, I'd use the 2024. And calculate how much somebody is going to have to pay in taxes. So the next one, the last one that ends, that we end up with this particular activity set is, how can I save some money? What are some, I have to pay these taxes, but there's got to be a way to not have to pay as much. So we can bring in what itemization is, when people would itemize, when not. I will say, I think it's like 90% of people just use the standard deduction. A lot of times if you're itemizing, you may be using a tax professional unless you are a mathy person. But it kind of ends up with, how can I save some money? And on the next slide there, you will, this is actually what it will go into a little bit, how you can lower your taxable income. You can use the, let's see, oh gosh, you can put money into your Roth IRA or into your retirement. They go into this health savings account, how you can put money in there and you have the pre-taxed. It's kind of nice, but again, it doesn't go as too deep where you get more lost, but it just says, okay, there is more out there that we can use to actually legally save money with our taxes, instead of, they always want to know how to commit fraud with taxes or tax evasion. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that, but here's some legal ways to save. And then I'm actually going to take a website. I do see you guys have comments in there, and I'm not ignoring you. I am focused on my time and your time. So I'm not ignoring people, but that's a great thing to keep in mind there. Married filing separately, common property there, or community property. Okay, the website I just gave you, here's another spot where kids can take this and tie it directly into themselves. I'll have them pull up their W-2. I do make sure they know your social security number is on that, so please black that out or make sure you don't have that out. But I'll have them get their own numbers. And if you click on this website that I've provided for you, you can actually enter in what, how much you paid in taxes, which would be box 2 on our W-2 form. You can enter in what year, what state you're in. And then if you look at your receipt, it will go through and it will tell you how much your tax dollars went to each of those items. So I'll just say that I'm looking at it myself. I'll say 15,000 I paid in taxes, and there's my state. And right now it's just got 2023 in there. But if you got into that website, you can go through, and if you paid $15,000 in taxes, which again is box 2 in your W-2, you can go through and it will tell you that $6,400 of that actually went to healthcare. 6,200 went to military. And so here's where students can put in the amount of taxes they paid if they made over the standard deduction, and they can see how much money went to each thing. And I always love looking at the percentages of how much, like, education gets so little. So that's a great little website that you can use as well. So Amy, this next one, this is some stuff that I will pull in from Next Gen. What is a W-2 form? How do you fill out a 1040? There's the Next Gen tax unit, so you can see all of the stuff that it has provided for you. And I pick and choose from all kinds of different curricula, and I put things together. If you really want to get mathy, you can use the income tax brackets, and you actually have to calculate based on how much somebody made and what their standard deduction was. And then you figure out they're going to owe X amount of dollars in standard deduction. So depending on what level you're at, you can go from pretty simple, like, let's just look at this paycheck stub and understand net versus gross and what these deductions are, why we pay taxes. And then you can make it pretty complicated as well when you get into the more mathy parts of it and doing the calculations. And then I show them that you can find a little chart online and get all of that information, and then they get mad because I made them do all the math.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie, for that, and for that insight into how you apply this and tailor it to meet the needs of your students. I just want to be mindful of the time. You guys know, if you've been here before, I like to respect your time. So it is 5:32, and if you need to hop off, I appreciate you being here so much. I hope you feel more confident bringing taxes into the classroom. If you are able to stay around for a minute or two, I'm going to open it up for questions and talk a little bit more about the resources. But again, thank you for being here. I hope you'll join us next week to learn about how the stock market game with our friends from Sigma can help our students gamify investing and connect to their future selves. And I'm just going to say, in addition to these amazing resources that Jamie has included, a reminder that W-2 and completing that 1040 hits that skill development that the standards would love our kids to have. So that's that real life practice right there. I've also included some standalone lessons on more the intermediate level, kind of like what Jamie was saying. If you just want to look at calculating the paycheck, some of the plug in the math, as opposed to really digging into the math like we math geeks really enjoy. If that's not where your students are at, here is some more lessons and information for you. And if you liked that Annie Casey participant guide with that little kind of cheat sheet information on credit scores, I included the one on taxes and income as well, just to have those trauma-informed resources in your back pocket. Thank you so much. We have 4 more sessions coming up in August. And just a friendly reminder that taxes are the yearly subscription to the country you live in. Childhood was our free trial, but now we're deep in it. So anything you can bring to our students to help them demystify and de-stress the taxing process will pay off for them in the future. Thank you again to Jamie and Bobby. And if anyone has any questions, we'll be here for a moment. But thank you again, everyone, for being here, and have a wonderful Monday evening. Oh, also, if you're still here and you're interested in financial fitness for life materials, why don't you go ahead and send me an email? And I'm going to put my email in the chat here. Did have a question on that. Normally that is a for-cost curriculum, but we work closely with Financial Fitness for Life and would love to get it out into Washington. So if that is something you're interested in, and we'll include that in the post email as well. Thank you again, everyone, for being here.